On today's report, we'll get immediate reactions to VP Harris's major policy speech from this past Friday and what that means to multifamily and millions of renters. We cover a new ban in San Francisco of revenue management tools, EliseAI's latest round of funding, Jay Parsons' take on 5 recent earnings calls from the REITs, 2 recent acquisition stories, Blackstone selling nearly $1 billion portfolio to Equity Residential, and a Denver deal part of RMR Group's $3 billion acquisition plans. New development strategies in California, Greystar's got a huge mega community that just opened, and Costco is making a bid into the multifamily space. Finally, forum registrations will officially open in early September. Mark your calendars, it's going to be a good one. Enjoy.
Let's start today with breaking news from Friday. Kamala Harris introduced a very sweeping economic proposal. It included up to $25,000 in down payment support for first-time home buyers, a $10,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers, tax incentives for builders that build starter homes sold to first-time buyers, an expansion of a tax incentive for building affordable rental housing, a new $40 billion innovation fund to spur innovative housing construction. It would repurpose some federal land for affordable housing, a ban on algorithmic-driven price-setting tools for landlords to set rents, and it would remove certain tax benefits for investors who buy large numbers of single-family rental homes. Now, clearly, this is the first time she's really weighed in on this. Of course, if Trump and others submit their own plans, we'll be happy to cover those in the future, but let's stick with Harris's plan from this Friday initially. Tyler, there's a few things in here very specific to our space. Of course, an incentive for former renters who pay on time, that's her words, to get a nice payment toward their first home. There's also a crackdown on algorithmic setting software, potentially removing some incentives for corporate multifamily owners and managers. Curious what your take on this big proposal is.
Yeah, well, first I would say that our prediction going into 2024 was that housing, multifamily housing even, was going to be mainstream, was going to be on the political stage, and that's proven to be the case. And for good reason. Housing affordability is an incredibly important topic in this country. Now, as you said, this is kind of the first set of policy platform specifics that we've seen from this candidate, and very interesting to see a mixed bag, really. In particular, you alluded to these are iterative on what her predecessor candidate, President Joe Biden, had put out there. One of the interesting things that jumps out to me, and obviously this is Friday, we're recording this, I'm sure more details will come out. We've been working all day, but the lack of focus that I've seen, and perhaps the outright omission of a rent cap, a federal rent cap. I think that was, from our point of view, a bad policy. Those of us in the multifamily industry point to the fact that that's never really worked, and it seemed to be universally panned. Folks from the right and left just seem to agree that is not actually going to fix the long-term problem of housing affordability. Now, the other topics, I think that there's some really good news. Anything around the idea of increasing supply, increasing the incentives to bring supply, is a wonderful thing. That is how we're going to have a long-term, stable, productive housing economy in this country. And then some things, in our opinion, also that are a mixed bag that have yet to prove out, right? Incentives moving people from rentals into the home buying industry. You could argue, well, why are you favoring one industry over the other, being home purchases versus rentals? You could also argue that, hey, if there's a reward, if there's a bucket of gold at the end of the rainbow of renting, that I pay my rent on time, perhaps more people will come in and rent. They'll get out of mom's basement and start to rent more because there's a reward. And obviously, we're big fans of building credit and having, long time value to renters. So I think that remains to be seen. The one that really stood out as very controversial in our industry, and frankly, I think here on the podcast, we've spent a lot of time talking about a blanket ban on algorithmic rent setting, a revenue management software, is misguided. It is not what's driving housing and affordability in our country, unless you want to make an argument that it's also what's driven down costs over the last year in places like Tampa. You can't have it both. You can't have it just one way. You got to have it both ways in this case. Hopefully, that dialogue goes away from blanket statements of pricing software bad to real fundamental conversations around what elements of revenue management software we want to avoid. Some of the sub bullet points in what we've read thus far seem to start to go that direction of understanding that it is the sharing of proprietary data amongst multiple landlords that we want to avoid. A lot of the revenue management software, LRO has been in the industry for decades. It doesn't do that. It fundamentally does not. It uses traffic. Traffic is a fair thing to use when determining a price, not transacted lease data across competitors. So I don't love it, but I think that obviously this is a democracy, and we'll see if people like it or if they don't. And I think the fact, again, the big headline for me is we're not hearing about a rent cap nationally. And that is good news for those of us who know that does not work for providing long-term housing affordability.
The San Francisco Board of Supervisors just unanimously passed an ordinance prohibiting the sale or use of algorithmic devices to set multifamily rents or manage occupancy levels, including technologies developed by RealPage, Yardi, and other third-party revenue management companies. This is the first city in the U.S. to ban this type of software. Tyler, we talked about an effort like this in Colorado that never really went much further. What do you think about this effort in San Francisco?
Yeah, credit to our friend of the pod, Dom Beveridge, for kind of calling out this risk. The phrase progressive often means first to do things. We know that San Francisco is a progressive market. And so in cases that can be good because it's going to prove out things and concepts that need to be tested. Generally speaking, there is a lot of consensus in housing and economics in general that revenue management is not a net negative on society. I think that this misses the mark of kind of the more core fundamental nuanced questions that a lot of folks are aware of. There was an article that came out yesterday in the Miami Herald talking about that RealPage has 3 different types of revenue management software that it uses, and there really several of those, including LRO, are not at issue. They don't use anything coming close to proprietary data. And so I think when you apply a blanket ban, that is not in line with a solutions-oriented proposal that we've seen in other markets. So I think most of us in multifamily would view this as a step in the wrong direction, taking technology, taking efficiency out of the market. And ultimately, I imagine as many kind of first laws to the market find, there will be challenges, there will be pushback. But overall, we're hopeful, though this is a negative, I think, for our industry, but we're hopeful that there will be more nuanced conversation about what types of revenue management software are pro-consumer and any changes that may need to be made to those. But overall, this seems really too broad.
There's been some big financing news out of the prop tech industry. EliseAI just announced $75 million raised in a Series D round, valuing the company in excess of $1 billion, establishing EliseAI as a quote-unquote unicorn. We've obviously got a great, robust integration with Elise. Tyler, what's your take on this news?
Yeah, no, we are happy for them. We're happy for our ecosystem and really good leadership. Spent a lot of time with Minna at NAA recently, so happy for that group. And frankly, with all genuine feelings, believe they are the type of company that will be around for a long time. So as you mentioned, we obviously have an integration with Elise. We also compete with them on AI. And what our partners have found, and I, in visiting communities where Elise is used, have heard the same thing, is that any tool, any AI tool that genuinely lifts the amount of work off the site staff is a huge win. So I think more than anything, Elise has proven to be a category leader in conversational AI. They were the first to market on things like maintenance, automated maintenance ingestion, and the ability, I think if anybody forgets this, you just need to visit a site. The amount of redundant questions that come to our team members, especially in the old school property-centric model, much less so in the renter-centric kind of new operating model of centralization. But there still is an overwhelming amount of communication that is redundant or unqualified. And so AI, this is a use case. There hasn't been a ton of use cases outside of this where there really is value being created for everybody. Renters get information more efficiently. Property managers don't have to staff to answer the same questions all the time, right? And an AI company, a prop tech company, can really receive revenue from that. So overall, this is great news. Again, congrats to the team at EliseAI. We look forward to continuing to partner and compete with them. But yeah, this is great news for our ecosystem.
The 5 big apartment REITs recently reported their Q2 earnings calls. Big thanks to Jay Parsons for doing the legwork of summarizing them for the rest of us. Jay is the former SVP, chief economist, and head of industry principles at RealPage, now the head of investment strategy and research at one of our partners, Madeira Residential. His 7 main takeaways from these earnings calls were: expense growth is moderating, insurance premiums are cooling fast, renters remain in very strong financial health, at least among market rate renters in Class A, B apartments where the REITs typically play. But that said, coastal REITs are still wrestling with unpaid balances among a small number of long-term non-paying residents. Renter turnover is very low, also true in the private sector, perhaps the biggest surprise in 2024. Nearly all REITs said they see apartment cap rates settling around 5% for properties trading today, with several taking subtle digs, especially in the Sun Belt, of Wall Street's valuations that typically assume cap rates above 6%. And finally, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic markets remain top performance on occupancy and rent growth, especially in the suburbs. Tyler, do you think he got this summary right, or what else are you hearing from operators in the REIT space?
I mean, nobody knows more than Jay. And yeah, Jay now at Madeira, partner to Funnel. So really excited about him continuing to bring great content to us in his new role. But yeah, it is absolutely right, which is that there's always nuance to what's going on in the markets. We're going to talk a little bit about acquisitions in a moment, but it's an unthawing of what's happening, right? The certain markets are coming out of this, the out of control expense increases we've talked about for the last couple of years seem to be coming more into control. And so we're on the different side of this cycle, and we're on a part of the cycle where folks are starting to feel optimistic. And again, it does vary by market. But again, as we talk about here in a minute, acquisitions, I think that folks looking ahead are optimistic about multifamily, about the rental industry, especially because one of the things we didn't really touch on there, but we've touched on in previous episodes, is that, the biggest factor in multifamily for the last 18 months, and still today in a lot of markets, especially across the Sun Belt, this is the subtext to all the Sun Belt news, is that supply was very strong. And again, that's a win for housing affordability. It's a win for renters. It's a challenge if you're a multifamily operator because rent growth is going to stall a little bit. But the flip side of that, as we know, is that the supply is going to fall off probably a cliff in 18 months, kind of 18 to 36 months. We imagine that's going to come down dramatically. Demand is not going to come down. It seems, and this is indicated in some of Jay's data, demand is strong and will remain strong for many reasons. And so ultimately, yeah, if you're a REIT, and to your point, we get to spend a lot of time with REITs. We have 3 public REIT customers that are kind of big known names, several others that are a little less known that are also REITs. But they are, I think, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel through a really difficult time. And that's great news for our industry.
You alluded to some other acquisition news. Let's cover these two together. Blackstone just sold nearly a $1 billion apartment portfolio to Equity Residential, 3,500 rental units included in that, scattered between the Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, and even Denver markets, where that REIT has been actively expanding its footprint. There was also an acquisition by the RMR Group in Denver, a 240-unit complex, $70 million acquisition, not chump change, but it's part of a much bigger announced $3 billion acquisition plan. So Equity Residential has just acquired a new Mountain West Sunbelt portfolio. RMR Group had previously moved into that market last year. Tyler, what do you make of all the acquisition news?
Yeah, it's springtime in multifamily, and what I mean by that is, again, things are thawing. That we've been in a long period of deals just not happening. It's because it's really hard to do deals when costs are going up. You don't know when rates are going to come down. You don't know when demand's going to come back. And so while we're not seeing anywhere near the deal volume that we were several years ago, all of these deals are being done with a lot of underwriting assumptions that the future is going to look better than it does today. Again, that costs are going to be in control and that rent growth is going to start up again. So that's kind of the biggest headline here. Specific to these two, again, public companies, RMR also a public company and a Funnel customer, they are thinking about growth. They're thinking about where that growth is going to come from. Equity Residential in this case, anybody who listens to earnings calls, as I often do, they for a long time they and other coastal REITs got beat up about being so heavy in the coastal markets. And so while you could argue that we're at the tail end of Sunbelt growth, I mean, as we just discussed, the short-term pain right now in the Sunbelt is really strong because places like Austin and Nashville have tons of supply. But when you take a holistic long-term view, it seems to me that they're diversifying their strategy. Both of these large organizations are saying, these are markets we feel good about for 3 to 5 years. But again, the big headline is good news again for multifamily. Folks feel like it's springtime, that the sun is coming out. That's going to be a bright future for our industry. So happy to see deals changing hands. And in this case, there's probably a lot of subcontext. Blackstone selling a big portfolio. Another interesting kind of plot to this is I think it was the biggest REIT acquisition in a decade, right? I mean, the REITs at one point were kind of growing and shrinking to various degrees, but they've been very steady at their current size for a long time. So not sure. I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's going to be a trend, but certainly noteworthy to see, a big acquisition by a REIT where they've been fairly quiet in the acquisition markets for the last several years.
Let's talk about another trend that I'll link two stories together. Greystar just opened their largest ever community in Orange County. It's going to be 1,100 units, 14.5 acre footprint, massive space. Looks incredible from some of the pictures and renderings I've seen. And then our friends at Costco are doing something pretty interesting too. The next time you go to buy a disturbingly large cookie dough container, you can also pick up a new apartment right upstairs if you're interested. I wonder if you get a membership comped with that too. But they're building 800 residential units on top of one of their typical stores. So we've talked about the rise of mega managers. We've been talking about the REITs. Do you think we'll see a new trend of mega communities and more development of units?
Yeah, this is a fun story. I think the short answer is I hope so. So, Alex, I was there hanging out with you in Southern California last week, and one of the greatest places on earth. I grew up in Southern California. Every time I go back, I just think it's so amazing. But, why have people been leaving Southern California and California in general? Housing affordability, right? Nobody would argue. It's one of the greatest places on earth, but it is so dang expensive. And it also has a reputation for being a place where housing doesn't get built. And so this is great news. And to your question, I hope it becomes a trend because, housing density is ultimately kind of the number one NIMBY argument. NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? I own a single family home. I've got a big backyard. I don't want 300 apartments down the road for me, way too much traffic. So to see these size of communities, yeah, it's surprising, but it's great news. I mean, we should all be YIMBYs. We should be saying yes in my backyard and recognizing that, to have a thriving society, you need all sorts of various income levels and housing for different occupations. So I love this. Hope to see more of it. I think the Costco one is particularly interesting because in theory, you're not using a bigger real estate footprint. Your real estate footprint stays the same. You're just building on top of it. So folks that are, really environmentally conscious, I think should really be excited about this. There's Costco's everywhere. That's one of the more interesting kind of subplots. Could this be a way to retrofit? Every city in America has, these huge footprint type grocery stores, right? Club membership grocery stores. And I think it'd be very interesting if this model worked to have, without taking new land, building apartments on top of that. So anything that brings more supply to multifamily or to our housing economy is a great thing, and hope to see more of it, especially in beautiful sunny California.
My favorite piece of news, if you missed it, we announced we're going back to Terranea for the forum next year, April 15 to 17. Registration opens very soon. Be one of the first to know by getting on our registration waitlist, which will be linked in the show notes, and hope to see many of you there next year.
Yeah, and we'll go tour that Costco building if it's built by then. But yeah, looking forward to it. Hope you all can join us.